Well, would you look at that? What's up, guys? It's Parallax Abstraction, and this is Retro Flashback, showcasing gaming's roots for a new generation. Yes, indeed, I am here to talk to you guys about yet another retro console. This is the Super Retro-Cade. And well, if you looked at the title for this video or saw the thumbnail, you may be a little curious about this one, specifically because of the brand name that's on it. Indeed, this is the next product from Retrobit, makers of the Retrobit generations, which I positively vivisected on this channel last year. And that video is actually one of my most popular ones ever by a country mile, and one of my most controversial ones as well. And this is their attempt to basically reboot that project. And well, before we go any further here, I got a bunch of disclosure I got to do for you guys. It's going to take about 2 minutes. If you would rather skip it, there is a time link in the video description to do so, as well as a condensed version of this disclosure. But I really would ask that you indulge me for these 2 minutes, because I do believe this is important. So, back on October 6th, a representative from a company called Inex reached out to me via email and said that they were preparing to release a new retro console and that they were looking for some quote-unquote influencers, to help them beta test prototypes to ensure it shipped in the best condition possible. During this conversation, I discovered that Inex is in fact the parent company of Retrobit, and this was a successor to the Retrobit generations. They said they reached out to me specifically because of my prior video, and while they agreed with me that my tone went a bit over the top, they also agreed that my criticisms were completely valid and that that was a bad product that was pushed out too early. They said the Super Retro-Cade was their attempt to reboot the project under a new brand and that they wanted to do it right this time. But they wanted feedback from people who knew that what they were doing to avoid past mistakes. Their intentions seemed genuine, so I agreed to help them out. I was sent a prototype and did about 20 hours worth of testing, sending them pages of feedback. I received multiple firmware updates throughout testing, and they actioned nearly every item I submitted. As compensation, I was offered a complimentary copy of the final product, which I will get to keep and which this review is based on, as well as permission to post a video prior to retail release. I also asked them if they were willing to donate to my Extra Life campaign this year, and because of the amount of effort I put into testing, they donated $250 and are one of the reasons I hit all 3 of my stretch goals this year. I have not received a penny of direct financial compensation. Disclosure and transparency are 2 things sorely lacking in the games press these days, and while I am most certainly not a journalist, I feel a duty to my small but devoted audience to be as honest as I can. I believe that in spite of what I've mentioned above, that I can review the Super Retro-Cade honestly and fairly. As you will hear, while it is a big improvement over the Retrobit generations, it's still not without issues. Nonetheless, it's important you understand the connection I now have with this manufacturer and any potential unintended bias that may bring. I'm always open to discussing this in the comments. Alright, with that said, let's get this review started. Okay, and yes, we're back. So, yeah, this is their attempt to reboot the Retrobit generations and to fix the majority, if not all, of its problems. So, if you don't want to go back and sit through that whole video, though I would recommend you do just to get a little bit of a recap, this product is a $60 US all-in-one retro console that comes with 2 USB controllers, which are compatible with PC as well as the console, the ability to output via 720p over HDMI, or I believe it's 480p over AV output, so you can hook it up to an older TV or an older monitor if you wish. It has an SD card slot, which allows you to take save states of your games in a portable manner if you want, though an SD card is not required. Also, this thing, as with the Retrobit generations, is extremely easy to hack and add your own stuff to, though we will not be talking about that today. And, well, probably its biggest selling point is that it comes with over 90 games, 92 to be exact, preloaded, which is less than the Retrobit generations, but I do believe that the bar of quality is a little bit higher this time around. So, here's what the games list looks like. So, the publishing partners that they have lined up this time are 3 of the same and from the Retrobit generations, and with a couple of minor changes. So we still have Capcom, we still have Data East, we still have Irem, and instead of Jaleco, they have now partnered with Technos Japan, which is now a division of Arc System Works. Jaleco is gone, and Pico Interactive is gone. The majority of the Pico Interactive titles on the Retrobit generations were shovelware that were put on there to pad out its catalog. That's all gone, and Retrobit told me that they got rid of Jalico for similar quality reasons. Now, Jalico's history as a publisher is a little spotty, to put it mildly, but they did have some good stuff, and some of it was actually in the Retrobit generations, things like Pinball Quest and the like, and it would have been cool to keep that stuff, but I can understand that. You know, they have limited resources, and they got to work with what they've got here. And as you can see, it's a list of titles that ranges from the common and popular to the downright obscure and weird. And I actually really like that. I think there's a nice diversity of titles in this thing, and some really interesting ones that stand out that a lot of people who are more casual fans of retro games, you know, may not be familiar with, and I think that's really cool. We have some interesting ones in here like Holy Diver, which was a Japan-only game originally, though it is in English, from Irem, that was a very, very hard sort of Castlevania-like thing. We've got Three Wonders, which is an arcade game from Capcom that's actually 3 different games in one, which I always thought was very interesting. We've got multiple Double Dragon games. You've got Final Fight 1, 2, and 3. We do have Varth again, and oh yes, we will get to that later. And we have the Magical Drop games, which are very well regarded, and some other interesting stuff here. So almost everything in this package is from the arcades, the NES, or the Super NES. There is only one Genesis game on here at the present time, which is Mercs. It's not that the system doesn't have the ability to play other platforms. This is just what the licensing got them. Now, one interesting thing that Retrobit has been talking about, though this is not guaranteed, so you should take it with a grain of salt, is they are talking about releasing firmware updates for this unit over time that will include what they are calling free DLC, which is basically additional games that will get patched into the unit free of charge for anyone who owns one. That's very cool, and if they can pull that off, I think that will be awesome. However, that does require a little bit of knowledge of how to do something like a firmware update, and we have no guarantee when or if that's actually going to happen. So that is, and to be frank about it, this is not a product really being marketed to enthusiasts like us. People who know how to use emulators or how to build something like a RetroPie, this is not really aimed at us. It's aimed at your average consumer who's going to be like, oh, wow, I remember these old games, and it's only $60 and is going to grab it off the shelf at a Walmart or a Best Buy or something like that, right? But that's not to say it doesn't have value to people like us as well. So, yeah, how have they changed this thing up? Well, it's almost entirely software. This unit is actually the same hardware that the Retrobit Generations was based on. It just comes in a different, and I personally think much nicer looking case design. But everything under the hood is exactly the same. They did include different controllers this year, and they're not bad. They are a little bit small. Now, I'll show you a comparison picture here. I mean, I have giant man hands, so, I mean, you can take that with a bit of a grain of salt, but holding these things for a little while is a little tiring on my hands, and they are very plasticky and very cheap feeling. You know, they definitely don't feel super solid. Controllers like the ones that came with, for example, the Super NES Classic feel like the original hard-as-nails Super Nintendo controllers. These do not feel that way. But the nice thing is they are USB and they can plug into a PC. And though I have not tried it, because this is really just an Android box underneath, in theory you could take other USB controllers like an Xbox 360 controller or something like that and plug them in here for a better experience. I have not tried that. Your mileage may vary, but these just detect as standard USB input devices, so I can't see why you couldn't do that, which would be quite nice. And obviously, this unit is competing against things like the Super NES Classic. The Retrobit Generations was pushed out early in no small part because there was a shortage of the NES Classic and they wanted to fill the void. They're trying to do a similar thing with this, except they have put a lot more time and spit and polish into it, as I disclosed earlier. And obviously, despite Nintendo saying they were going to fix the supply problems with the SNES Classic, those things are still impossible to find. I was very lucky that I managed to pre-order one, but they're still nigh impossible to get at this point. So if you want something like that and didn't get your hands on one of those, you're really probably looking at this as an alternative. And I'm happy to say that in general, it is much better. So let's break down some of the features, and then I'll pick a random selection of games and we'll play them to show you what they look like and how they emulate. All right. Okay. So when you pick a game here, you've got a couple of different options. So we've been sitting here in silence for a little while. What they did actually add background music to this system, which I'll let you hear here. It's 3 pretty generic royalty-free sounding loops. It's not that great. I would probably just leave this off, but it's nice that they give you a little something here. So You can, with each game, have it either full screen, which means it will take the image and stretch it to fill the entirety of the screen that you have, or you can have it play in its original size. You only have those two options. You had a third one in the Retrobit Generations, which was a sort of anamorphic stretching thing. That's really what the full screen is here. The standard stretch is gone, which is good. That wasn't very good. Now, the Retrobit Generations did have scan lines. And I recall saying in that video, when the subject of scan lines came up, I said something along the lines of, but whoever wants that stuff anyway. Good friggin' lord, people. Okay, I get it. You guys like your scan lines. I don't get why. I personally don't want that, but you guys obviously do. So, hey, good on you. And you know what? You do you. I'm not going to say you're wrong for that. Unfortunately, you're not getting them with this thing. Yeah, they actually took that out of this unit. As I understand it, it was partially for performance reasons. It may get patched in again later, but there are no scan lines right now. So if that is important to you, sorry. I guarantee you they didn't take them out because of me, so don't send me hate mail about that. You can remap the buttons on both controllers. Once again, it's a little bit confusing how the UI here works, but it does function, and it's nice that also if you're playing things like games on the NES, for example, which only use 2 buttons, you can actually map multiple buttons to perform the same function. So you could press the B button or the Y button, for example, if you wanted to, which is kind of nice. You can remap each controller individually, which is cool. Unfortunately, this unit only does support 2 controllers. There's a few games in the pack that support 3 players. Don't have access to those, unfortunately. You can only play with the 2 players, which is a little bit of a bummer. And you can change your UI language, and there is a means to do a system restore to bring it back. Another little quirk as well, because of the emulators this is using, this is just an Android box running RetroArch cores underneath it. There's been a little bit of controversy I've seen online as to whether or not Retrobit has a proper license for RetroArch. That controversy seems to come up with every retro unit that comes out that uses RetroArch, so I don't know how much validity there is to that. I have not really looked into it. Unfortunately, due to some of the limitations of that, there are some weird quirks. Like, for example, if you're playing NES games, you can only set your input from this main menu. You cannot do it once the game has started. It won't work. The arcade games and the SNES games, I believe, do not have that issue. So, a little thing to keep in mind there. That is detailed in the manual, but it's not detailed here, which is a little bit of a pain. All right, so when you pick a game, for example, this one, you get this screen here. You can choose to load a previous save state that you have created. This is especially useful for the arcade games because you can, if you exit out without creating a save state, high scores are not saved. If you do create a save state, you can maintain high scores for competition, which is kind of cool. You can also choose to add this to your favorites. When you go back to the menu here, you can press the X button and you can sort how the games are displayed here. So you can sort by name, you can sort by publisher, you can sort by genre. The genres are a little loose in terms of what they are. This collection is a lot of fighting games, shmups, and platformers, though there are a few sort of sports and brawlers and things like that in here as well. You can pick the system that you want, and then you can display your favorites. One little kind of dumb thing about this, a little bug that I did not discover in testing, but that is in the final unit, you can't remove favorites. You can add them, you can go in here, and you see there's still an add button, which doesn't get rid of it. If there is an option to remove a favorite, I have not managed to find it. So they have, that is something that would be nice of them to fix, because right now, the only way to get rid of a favorite is to do a system restore and delete all of them. Not brilliant. Yeah. Okie doke. So let's start up Armored Warriors here, which is a good arcade title here from is this Irem or Capcom? I actually don't remember. I believe this is actually Capcom. Now, these are literally, yes, it is Capcom. So these are literally just ROMs. So you're going to get the exact experience as if you fired them up in an emulator or if you fired up like the original board, for example. So you see you got those pre-starts there. Some games will show the actual memory tests. There's a couple of games that actually are Japan ROMs. So it says something like, if you are playing this arcade game outside of Japan, you are committing a crime. Yeah, that's a little strange, but those are in there. And because these are original ROMs, you're getting everything in here, warts and all. So if a game had major slowdown, if it had graphical artifacting, if it had other weird problems in its original form, that's what you're going to get here. That's especially prevalent with the NES and SNES games because slowdown and lag were very common things on those systems, especially with older titles. And that's something that you're still going to get here. You know, I did a video a long time ago on the Double Dragon Trilogy, which was a PC remake, or not remake, but it was a collection of the original Double Dragon games. But they did a horrendous thing with the emulation, which was that they had it doing some sort of an automatic intelligence speed-up function that basically whenever, because the Double Dragon games actually didn't run very well, and what it did is whenever it detected a slowdown in the game, it would try to artificially speed up the emulator to keep it at a high frame rate, and it made it play, one, unoriginal, and two, it just played like absolute crap. This doesn't do anything like that. This is everything the way it was originally presented, for better or worse. And to be honest, I think that's the better way to do it. I think those artificial speed up things are the equivalent of like frame smoothing on an HD TV. It's awful. It's awful, awful, awful. So I like the fact that they did that. Now, the first thing you guys are probably asking here, you cyber sleazes, the first thing you guys are probably asking here is, well, how is the emulation? Because as you will recall, the emulation on the Retrobit generations was abysmal. Pretty much nothing ran properly, and some things ran so bad as to be nigh on unplayable in spots. I am happy to say that in my testing so far, the vast majority of these things, of the games in this collection, have run very, very well. In many cases, near exactly to the original. Now, if you are a hardcore purist, you are very likely going to find little things here and there that's off. A little bit of timing, a little bit of frame rate, a little bit of audio, something like that. And there are faults in this. The arcade games all have a very shrill quality to the audio. That is, there's a lot more high end and a lot more tinniness to the sound than you typically got in the original, or that you would get if you were playing in something like MAME. I brought that up to Retrobit. They said that is a limitation of the emulator they are working with, and they can't really do anything about it. They did their best to try to correct that. Not really so much a problem in the NES and SNES stuff. In fact, here, this is an arcade game, so I will back out and let you see something else here. But yes, that is a problem that they acknowledged. Let's go to the NES Bionic Commando here. This is a good one that a lot of people will know. Also one that was in the Retrobit generations and ran terribly. So I'll let you hear here. Indeed, right? So, as you can already tell, if you're familiar with Bionic Commando at all, you will know that this sounds proper now. There were actual voices missing in the NES emulator in the Retrobit generation, so the music sounded completely wrong. Definitely not the case here. It's working much, much better, and to me, the performance is as I remember. And like I said, it's probably going to be a little bit off. I mean, even if you're playing on an emulator that's not something like Hygan, there are little things here and there that purists will probably find off. But here's the thing. Once again, this isn't made for purists. This isn't made for the people who are using frame meisters and are... Whoa, there was a save. This is not made for the people who are using frame meisters to play the original consoles on their HD TVs, or who have these things hooked up to a Sony PWN display or anything like that. It's not made for that. This is made for your average consumer. Now, that does not excuse a lack of quality. Obviously, I ripped into the Retrobit generations because I said, for the sake of preservations, systems like this should be made, and they should be made well. Do they need to be made perfectly? I don't think so. And for a system where they're charging $60 and they still have to make a profit, if a piece of something has to get cut once in a while, that's kind of a reality of it. You know what? The NES Classic wasn't perfect either. The NES Classic had sound issues. It had performance issues in places. The Super NES Classic has done a much better job with that, but it's also made by Nintendo, which is a company with billions of dollars in the bank and who has a level of economy of scale for manufacturing that Retrobit does not. Now, I assure you guys, I am not trying to shill for these guys. I understand that you being small doesn't mean you get a pass for making a bad product, but I think this is a big improvement over what has come before, and is definitely going to be more than close enough for your average consumer. And as an enthusiast, I think it still does a pretty darn good job. Now, here's another key title here. This is Super R-Type. Now, in the Retrobit Generations video, this game ran way too fast to the point where it sounded weird. It basically sounded like someone had turned it up, turned it up to a 2x speed slider. Well, Hear for yourself. Now, as someone who played a lot of Super R-Type in my youth, I can tell you that that's playing properly. Or at the very least, 99% of the way there. It's definitely not sped up. It's definitely emulating far more correctly than it did on the Retrobit generations. And I think this is a very good, very nearly perfect representation of Super R-Type. And if you're someone who does think it's off, and who thinks that the only real proper way to play this is in High-Gan or on a actual Super Nintendo, then you might as well just turn the video off now, because this product will not satisfy you. And you know what? I'm not going to say you're wrong for that. You know, I'm somebody who has multiple times considered buying, you know, an analog NT Mini for a stupid amount of money because I'm that kind of an idiot. And because I like the idea of something that does that pure a job at emulation. And, yeah, but I think this does a very quality job of emulating what it is trying to emulate for the price point it has. I definitely think so. And of course, there have been other improvements as well. You know, the menu system is much better overall. It's much zippier. The games take far less time to load. I think it's a nicer presentation overall. I think it's generally a... you know, I think it generally does a very nice job at just conveying what you're getting and what's on here, and at a glance, you know, sort of seeing what you can get. Now, let's take a look at Magical Drop, which is another one here that's very popular. There are a couple of games in this package that originally came out in Japan that, well, as you can see here, have a lot of Japanese in them. There is, you know, there's enough English in this to get by, but there are a couple of other titles. I can't remember them off the top of my head here, but there are a couple of other titles in this that are in, that are actually in full-on Japanese. But to me, it's not a big problem, honestly, because most of those games are fairly simple to play. Like, I believe the arcade version of Magical Drop is in, that's in here, is in Japanese. But you know what Magical Drop is? It's a 2-button match 3 game. It's trivially easy to learn. It's very hard to master, but you don't need an extensive English tutorial to learn how to play freaking Magical Drop. You just don't. And yeah, I think it does a pretty good job of that, and of handling that stuff quite nicely. So you sort of see here. And the thing that I like about this console is that, you know, one of the reasons Retrobit is obviously working with these publishers who, by and large, are long dead. You know, Data East, their properties are owned by a mobile company now, but Data East went bankrupt years ago. Irem is largely out of video games. Capcom is still around. And while Arc System Works is still doing quite well, they are, you know, they bought up the rights to the Technos catalog a little while ago, but they're not really doing that much with them right now. And part of the reason Retrobit is working with these companies, obviously, is because they can get these products, you can get these licenses for cheap, which you won't necessarily be able to, or they wouldn't necessarily be able to, in other cases with bigger publishers. But I like this, though, because I like showcasing games that are a little weirder and a little stranger and a little bit more off the beaten path. I love the NES Classic and the SNES Classic, don't get me wrong, they are fantastic systems. But at the same time, they are playing very known quantity games. You know, what is in them is largely very high quality stuff, but it's the stuff you know. It's the Mario Brothers, it's the Zeldas, it's the Metroids, it's the Street Fighter 2s, it's, you know, it's a lot of the same stuff. And what's cool about this is it has some of those staples that you'll recognize. You know, you got your Mega Mans in here, even though you can play Mega Man 2 and 3 from the NES and the Mega Man Legacy Collection. You do have those two things in here. You have, you know, your Bad Dudes and your Double Dragons and the stuff like that that everybody kind of knows. But you have a lot of more obscure stuff in here as well. You have, you know, you have Three Wonders, you have Thunder Blaster, you have Varth, you have Super Dodgeball, you have Side Pocket. you know, you have 2 different versions of Bionic Commando, including the frankly kind of crap arcade version that most people don't that most people don't actually really know about. And it gives people an exposure to other titles that were a lot more niche and certainly not as popular, but are good in their own right, you know, are actually really good games that more people should play. And I really like the fact that it's doing that. I didn't talk about this either, so when you bring up the in-game menu here, which you can do by pressing start and select at the same time, another thing I like about this system and the generations, on the SNES Classic or the NES Classic, you have to get up and push a reset button, which I don't understand. Here you can just press start and select and get the menu up. You can save states. You can save up to 3 different save states on the internal memory or an SD card. You don't have to use an SD card if you don't want to, which is nice. You can change your button mapping on games that allow it. You can also change the game volume, which is really just to mute it, and you can restore all the defaults if you like. Again, save states are nice if you're trying to get your way through a particularly hard game, and for the arcade games is nice because you can save high scores to compete with your friends, which I think that's very nice. The features are fairly basic, but generally the majority of the stuff that you want is here. You know, having some more screen options would be kind of nice. You know, like, I've been playing everything here in the stretch mode, so I'll show you what original size looks like. Also, this is a product that was not necessarily engineered in North America, so there's a little bit of English in the UI. Yeah. So, but you can start it up like this, and as you see, this puts it in the proper aspect ratio. You're going to have black bars everywhere, but stuff's not going to be stretched. Honestly, this is how I prefer to play most games. I think this is the better way to go about it. So yeah, I think the emulation quality in this is far, far better. There are a couple of games that I have played that I'm not 100% sure they do feel a little bit off in places. There's a Data East fighting game on here. It's actually not a particularly good game, but let's see if we can find it here. I believe it is... Oh, bugger, where is it? It wasn't Fighter's History. There was another one in here. But basically, it was... it felt like it was playing a little slow in places. The game actually does play kind of slow to begin with. So it may very... Oh, Mutant Fighter. Here it is. This game feels like it plays a little bit slow, but the arcade original plays a little bit slow as well. So that may just be me. And frankly, this game's not very good. Not very good at all. Yeah, so here we go. But yeah, like, I really like the mix of titles in this. I think it's much, much better. And I just think it feels like they've done a better presentation on this as a whole, you know. Unfortunately, one of the things with this is, you may recall when I did the video on the generations, I talked about how it was covered in stickers because they changed so much prior to release. Unfortunately, I have to say that this game does have one sticker on the box as well. It's actually very nice. I think they did a much better job with the packaging this year, too. I think it's much more attractive. But they did, unfortunately, at the last minute, one of their publishing partners did require that they remove and replace 2 of the games. I am not allowed to tell you which ones. But yes, 2 of the games have been replaced. You could probably find out if you just took the sticker off your box. But that was all that was changed. Everything else was pretty normal here. And yeah, you got a collection of 92 games in here. You know, the NES Classic only had 30. The SNES Classic, I believe, has less than that. And it's a lot of games, so even if there's a few stinkers in here or a few games you are really not a fan of, there's probably a lot you will be. And there's a lot of 2-player stuff, which is really nice, you know, and you've got some, you've got a lot of shmups in here, which I like. You know, we've got Thunder Blaster, which is an actual pretty decent one in here. There's actually... Irem is most famous for R-Type, but they actually made a lot of other games, some of which are really just variants of R-Type in some ways, but some of them of which have their own cool ideas, and you get exposed to those in here, and you wouldn't normally see that in a lot of these other collections that tend to focus on only the super popular stuff. So the only other thing I will say here, though, is that's a little bit of a bummer, is that every game in the collection starts in the stretch mode. And this is something I pushed Retrobit to change, and they didn't, which kind of sucks, because the stretch mode makes vertical shmups look like this. Oh, you know what? I screwed that up. Hold up. Excuse me a moment. Yeah, so I picked the wrong one. No, we want full screen. Excuse me. There we go. So it makes vertical shmups look, well, like this. Yeah. Playable? Absolutely. But as you're going to see here, see, if you're playing outside the country of Japan, you are involved in a crime. Yeah, you can totally play it vertical like this, but ugh. This stretch makes everything look, frankly, obese. And yeah, I am not a fan of it at all. As I said, I pushed Retrobit to default the vertical shmups to the original orientation, and they didn't. Yeah, that's a bummer. And for people who are just playing this off the shelf and don't want to screw around with the settings, I think they're going to think, ugh, this looks like crap. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of that. But it is easy to change, and it does remember your chosen settings for video orientation in between boots of the system, so you don't have to change it each time. And, well, okay, obviously I got to show you guys this, right? Yeah, it wouldn't be a review of this console without this. Well, would you look at that? Yes, indeed, Varth plays the proper way around out of the box. Yes, this was the thing that I teased at the start of my Retrobit Generations video that sent me into a tizzying rage, was the fact that Varth played sideways and there was no way to adjust it, and they did fix that this time. One, we still got to keep Varth, which is nice, so the sound is still really shrill and tinny, which kind of bums me out. But it does play the right way around, and I am very happy for that, because I actually like Varth. I think it's a shmup from Capcom that a lot of people don't know about, and that kind of goes underappreciated, and now people can play it and play it properly. Now, unfortunately, they did not add a feature that I would have really liked and that I also requested, which was still the ability to actually rotate the screen orientation, because there are people like myself who have monitors that you can turn sideways very easily, and it would have been really neat to be able to play this game in its original form factor that is vertical and yet fills the screen. They didn't do that. I don't know how hard that is to implement. I wouldn't think it's that hard, because if you're using a RetroArch emulator on a PC, it's actually very easy to do an orientation shift. But they didn't do that for whatever reason. You never know. In a firmware update, maybe it will come. And yes, I know it is a very niche feature that only a handful of people care about, and that 1% is not what this system is aimed at. But again, it would have been nice, you know, give a little bit more of a bone to enthusiasts, and you might sell a few more of these things to people who might not care otherwise, you know? Just stuff like that. But yeah, so to draw something of a conclusion here, if I'm honest with you, I do think that this is a major improvement over the Retrobit Generations. It still has some problems. There is still a little bit of lag in the menus, though it's much, much better. I definitely think some people are going to find that the emulation quality is not up to enthusiast level standards. Again, that's not aimed at us. This product is not made for people who are going to be that picky. Not that there's anything wrong with being that picky, but I don't think that this is a product really made for people like that. If you want a package like this that has high-GAN level of emulation, you're not going to get it for $60. And they can't sell these things for hundreds of dollars, you know. Analog, that company that makes the $400 NES console, is an ultra niche company that is selling to a very small market without a lot of profit margin. That's just not the way it works for people who make things like this. So yeah, this system is not without its fault. You know, I wish the controllers were a little bit better built. Retrobit actually does make a USB SNES clone controller. And I actually, with my prototype unit, I got one of those for testing. That is not the model they decided to go with. I wish they did, because it felt much more solid and much better built and much more comfortable in my hands than their little dog bone controllers. They're not bad, these controllers, honestly, and you know, I have 5 360 controllers in my condo. I could easily drop those in and use those instead. But it would have been nice to see that quality upped a little bit more. I really wish we could have gotten better quality sound out of the arcade games. I think that shrill audio is a bummer, and I wish they could have researched a way to fix that. little bit of spit and polish things. I think the menus could have been a little bit more, the menus, you know, the menus could look a little nicer than they do. They don't loop around. So for example, if you want to go to the main menu, you've got to go all the way to the bottom. Return to game is at the top, but if you press up, it doesn't loop around. You know, some people don't like that. I personally think that's a good quality of life thing. The menus are a little bit ugly. The UI is far better, but is definitely basic. I mean, compared to the SNES Classic, it's no contest, which is better looking. You know, but it does come with some other nice little features that are good for enthusiasts, like, for example, AV out. So I'm going to show you guys a little clip here of me playing this on my Commodore 1084 monitor. This has to be shot from my phone, so forgive the quality. But it works, and it looks really good. You know, the Commodore 1084 has a really high DPI, and it shows with this. It looks very, 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 very solid and very crisp, even on that low resolution. And I like that they give you the option for that if you want. You don't get AV cables in the box because I think they assume if you're going to hook this up, you're going to find the cables to do that, which I can appreciate. It does come with an HDMI cable, which is nice that they just toss one of those in the box. The controllers also have 10-foot cables on them, which is very nice. Given that, you know, even the SNES Classic, which does come with 2 controllers in the box, only has, you know, they're still very short cables. And especially with the fact that you don't have to get up to this thing to reset it or bring up the options, that's very nice in its own right too. So you also have that. I would also say that there aren't too many games in this package that actually make use of the shoulder buttons, which is a little bit strange. The NES did have shoulder buttons, but a lot of games didn't need them, and most of the games in this package don't. So you're actually not going to be using the shoulder buttons very often, though you can remap them if you want. And honestly, if you're someone like me who has big hands and you're playing with these tiny controllers, you might actually be best to map some of the common functions onto the shoulder buttons just for comfort and ease of use. So, and that is something that you do have the freedom to do, which is kind of nice. But yeah, I think it's got you know, it only has basic features, but you know, it does what most people are going to want, I think, quite well. It's going to satisfy your average consumer for sure. And the games run well enough that I think they are good enough for enthusiasts. I will happily keep this hooked up under my TV. And you know what I've been doing is I've been trying to build up a collection of these retro consoles, the good ones. And what I actually do is I have a bag, basically a big canvas shopping bag that I put these in along with their controllers and their power adapters. And what I do is I carry them around with me for things like LAN parties or get-togethers at a friend's house or whatever. I just keep the bag with me and I just toss it in my car when I'm going somewhere. And sometimes I'm like, hey, you know, I got my SNES Classic. I've got my Super Retro-Cade. You guys want to pull this out and play some games? Just, you know, when we're hanging out and having beers or whatever. And people are like, yeah, absolutely, let's do that. Because that's the thing, right? Young people today do have an appreciation for retro games. Like, when I was beta testing this, I brought it to a LAN party at my work. And I was sitting there with some guys who are much younger than me and didn't grow up with these games, and we were playing a bunch of stuff two-player, and they were having an absolute blast. You know, one of our salespeople actually brought his kids in for a little while, and they were screwing around with this, and they loved it. They thought it was great fun. And, you know, these games don't look state-of-the-art. They don't look like the latest AAA things. They don't even look like the mobile or tablet games that a lot of kids are playing these days. But they still had fun with it, and they can still appreciate good, fun games when they see them, even if they don't look state-of-the-art. And that's what a system like this is really great for. And if we want young people to continue to have an appreciation of these retro titles and the roots of video games as we know them, I think this is a very important thing to have out there. But you got to do it right, and it has to have a decent quality. While I think my tone with my Retrobit Generations video went way over the top, I 100% stand by my criticisms in that. That system did a disservice to nostalgia, it did a disservice to preservation, and it just did a disservice to its customers. And honestly, I think Retrobit has redeemed themselves with this. This system is much, much better than what came before it. It's not perfect. No system of this type in this price range is going to be. But I think it does not just an adequate job, a more than adequate job. And if I didn't get a review unit of this, I would have probably, well, I don't know if I would have purchased this for myself after the Retrobit Generations, because that I did purchase myself, and I was burned by that. But I would have, if I'd gone out and purchased this myself, I would be very happy with my purchase and I'd be keeping it. I absolutely would. Because this has just been... I've had fun playing with this thing, and it's a rare thing when you see a company, especially a small business in this day and age, cop to their mistake in such an honest and candid way and say, we're committed to doing this right, and they actually did do it right. You know, they probably could have just either not bothered to put out another one of these, or definitely done it so that it was better than the Generations, but still not great, and probably got away with it. But they decided to do a better job than just getting the basics done. And, you know, to the point where I happen to know for a fact that this system came to market later than they wanted because they didn't think it was ready yet. And they kept it back to make sure they got it right, because they know that they're not going to get another shot at this if they screw it up. That's a refreshing thing to see, and I'm very glad for that. So, if you want to be able to play a large variety of retro games from a variety of platforms and stuff that's not always the most popular thing in the world, I think you could do very well by this system. I think you get a lot in the box for the price, and the quality is not 100%, but I'd say it's at least 90%. And for the vast majority of people, including even most enthusiasts, I think that will be good enough. And those who want perfection are already attaining that elsewhere, so it really doesn't matter in that situation. So yeah, that's the Super Retro-Cade, basically known as the Retrobit Generations 2, developed by Retrobit in 2017. It comes out on December 15th, 2017 for $60 US. I personally think it's well worth it, and I do want to commend Retrobit for turning this around. You know, everybody does deserve a second chance, and I do think that they redeemed themselves. And whether you agree with me or not is up to you, but as I said, if I purchased this, I'd be happy that I did. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you liked what you saw here, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. That does help me out a great deal. If you want to watch something else, check out the videos on screen now, and don't forget to follow @PXA Media on Twitter to find out about new stuff first.